The year is 2016, January, before there is any real sense of the comparatively easygoing shitstorm the year will bring with its unfolding. The Witness, long-awaited follow-up to Braid, a game I never played but was aware of, billed as an exploration-based puzzle game, spiritually adjacent to and inspired by Myst, a game so much an undisputed favorite of mine that I describe it instead as foundational, has just arrived on digital storefronts. Enter me, a person who likes video games and is very interested in the kind of game The Witness portends to be. Still dealing with the lingering frustrations, sorrows, and fears relating to, by then year-old attempts and failures to get Steam and GOG copies of Riven to work on a modern-era PC, The Witness is poised to satisfy cravings I haven't been able to address since I have lost track of. And so, getting this game in front of my eyes and into my brain seemed not only important, but necessary. The game faded in, and I approached a small panel where I found a circle and line. I emerged into the daylight above and happened upon another circle and line. Several circles and lines later, I make it out into the wider island and find my way deeper into circles and lines. More and more. Was this what I was waiting for? Well, eventually, yes, it kind of was what I was waiting for. Up front, it was annoying and disappointing to be building myself up for a return to the headspaces and mental pathways of the likes of Myst and Riven, only to find out it was essentially a glorified book of brain teasers. In my first wanderings through the landscape of The Witness, I couldn't help but imagine the island being stripped away and the game becoming as a prepackaged Windows app you could pull up at any time you needed to distract yourself from a workday, or putter around with on your phone when that friend you tolerate convinces the rest of the room to watch that weird art film they won't shut up about. I like a lot of films, so keep it handy. It also doesn't help that I was playing this utterly gorgeous game on my old PC, which by 2016 was already struggling to engage software with this kind of graphical heft. Frequent frame drops, significant lockups as my graphics card frantically tried to keep up. My whole initial experience with the game was laced with whispers of, "You should be playing this on a new PC." The revelations of the game meant less to me back then because they were always peppered with moments of the illusion being shattered. Okay, just give it a sec. There we go. I'm not the kind of person to hang the entire experience of a game on the all-important buzzword immersion, but a game as subtle and simultaneously mentally exhausting as The Witness kind of relies on a smooth experience. Cut to early 2020, before we found out how much worse it was going to be than 2016, and my anticipation to finally play all of the games I had accrued over the years of waiting for finances to line up in my favor of building a new PC could finally be indulged. And I went straight for Minecraft and decades-old atmospheric puzzle games, which is fairly classic me. But I'm glad I did, because it was at that time that The Witness finally hit my brain in the way that I hope every game will. There was no way The Witness wasn't going to be intrinsically linked in my mind to Myst and Riven, two games that I played at more or less the same time as my revisit to The Witness. These games really spoke to me back in the day, and the idea of playing what might be seen from a distance as a sort of spiritual successor is only going to reach back and summon memories and feelings close to those early experiences. The kind of stuff that leads to my previous two videos on Myst and Riven, respectively. They are games that came with the promise of head-bending puzzles to solve, but they were hidden amongst the environment around them in such a way that they might not be recognizable as puzzles until you've started solving one of them. These games, Riven in particular, blur the lines between mechanics and environment so completely that I kind of struggle to compare them to anything else out there. They are games that reward observation and understanding as a gameplay mechanic, fostering a mental and possibly emotional attachment to a place rather than a goal. They are worlds that hide puzzles waiting to be found. This is what I was excited for, booting up The Witness for the first time. wandering a mysterious and curiosity-filled world rendered fully in 3D with fluid movement, perspective, and sight integrated into the experience, something that classic Myst and Riven both lacked. I couldn't wait to be fooled by the innocent nature of the world around me, only to find startling and inspiring revelations hiding just beneath the surface. But that's not what we got. We got circles and lines, just on screens, right there in our faces. And they're like sometimes very bendy lines and sometimes confusing lines, but at no point in the beginning was I forming that deeper bond with the world around me that I was looking for. The disappointment that this generated for me back in 2016 was heavily qualified. Sure, The Witness wasn't what I was hoping for, but that didn't take away from just how gorgeous the game was, or how challenging and inventive it was within its own paradigm. What The Witness does do as a game is pretty remarkable. Spoiler alert, I really wound up loving it. I think this game says a lot more than people give it credit for, and the statement I think it's making might go deeper than most people assume it would. I should also let you all know that I intend to talk about this game pretty loosely, like in terms of spoiler stuff. It's not a game that you can really spoil in the traditional sense, because The Witness is entirely experiential. There isn't really one thing that can give the game away, as it were, but there is one thing that I will be talking about that will heavily alter the core experience for a first-time player, and I think weaken one of the core aspects of playing the game. So as for spoiler warnings, there will be a real one later, but we're not there yet. For those of you who haven't played Myst, it is a game about an anonymous player character being alone on a mysterious island surrounded by puzzles to solve. Oh dear. Oh no, I said Myst, didn't I? That's the other game. That fits the description perfectly. But yeah, for those of you who haven't played The Witness, it is a game about an anonymous player character being alone on a mysterious island surrounded by puzzles to solve. So far, so good, right? The puzzles from the very beginning of the game consist entirely of drawing uninterrupted line segments from circles to where the line segment terminates. These puzzles get harder and harder as you work your way through each area of the island, with each of those areas teaching you one new rule about how these line puzzles need to be solved, not once offering the player written or spoken instructions except for, right when you get started, eventually reaching completion when a region-specific laser shoots out of a yellow box up to the top of a mountain. And for a good long while, that's what the game is. It is an amazing piece of teaching without explaining, which is basically to video games what show don't tell is to film. How can you coax a player into learning for themselves how to engage with your game? The Witness is centered almost entirely on this principle, just for almost the entirety of it. It is clear that the method is always the same. You must always start your line path from a circle, and you must always end at the termination point. Puzzles start small, giving you easy layups, then slowly start to expand outwards and add restrictions in ways that make it clear what those restrictions mean for you moving forward, all without specifically telling the player anything. Rules like line segments need to separate different colored markers from each other. Your line needs to outline these square-based shapes while also containing said shapes. The number of triangles in a square determines how many sides of that square need to be part of your line segment. Sometimes you will need to pass specific markers on your path. Sometimes you will be drawing two line segments simultaneously. Sometimes you will need to take environmental clues into account for the path you need to draw. There are a whole host of rules to consider throughout the game which start to overlap later on. As each puzzle path continues, things get more and more complicated within that rule set. You know, the kind of iterative difficulty you expect from a video game. The hope is always that you have been in fact retaining information so as to gently rise into understanding when puzzles start looking like this. Oh my goodness! And you will be able to turn on that laser instead of just running into a metaphorical or literal wall that you can't get around. The island regions will be showing you all kinds of scenarios, and at times exceptions to the rules that by the time you activate the big yellow box, you will be well versed in this particular idea or rule, this law of the land, if you will, so that you will only be momentarily stymied when you crash headlong into something like this. Yeah! These bruisers are littered throughout the island, even as early on as just down the road from your starting point, and are placed just conspicuously enough to creep back into your attention every now and then. So while these particular daunting challenge panels are optional, they are a hint at what is coming, as the later portions of the game will start mixing and matching rules and really testing what it is you have learned in the game thus far. It's kind of tedious in practice. I expect it looks absolutely monotonous to outside observers, and let me tell you, it kind of is. Even giving this game an elevator pitch treatment is a nightmare to think about. It's a game about learning how to draw lines out from circles in different ways instead of experiencing the absolutely beautiful landscape around you. Now that is a snarky assessment, I admit, but it does reflect my early experience with the game. It seemed wrong to me just how much thought and design was put into the world when well over half of your time playing this game is gonna look like this, or other screens that look very similar. There's a lot of potential here for the experience to be lost on a good chunk of players before the implications of what is here really sink in. There isn't a clearly stated purpose or goal other than shooting as many lasers as you can to the top of the mountain, which could lead people to dwell on the vague and uncertain nature of the game, which is reinforced by a series of audio logs.
Up there, you go around every hour and a half, time after time after time.
These little devices will recite quotes from significant individuals, such as religious leaders, scientists, or philosophers, free of any direct context within the game. They're just kind of lying around waiting for you to find them and turn them on. There is also an optional yet arguably major element of the game in the infamous movie theater.
How easy is it for knowledge to spread?
Here there is nothing to do but watch thought-provoking lectures on science, philosophy, or just clips from a film that, for all we know, add to the theme of the game, though it's never specifically stated how. These can be, and are often, written off as overly intellectual set dressing to imply more than they deliver, which, sure, is an attitude I can't really argue with on the surface, even if I found them fascinating myself.
I had never left London. London had left me.
Yeah, even this guy. But ultimately, I found myself asking what was gained by having a game this shamelessly formulaic in its design. It's an open-world game, sure, you can work through the different island segments in whatever order you want, but The Witness, as a surface-level game, in terms of progression in the moment, is painfully rigid. Perform task to unlock next task. Do this until you have no more task to complete. You know, it's a tried-and-true formula. There are shades of this in just about every non-sandbox game out there. Do something the game wants you to do, then you will get to see more of game. Even Myst and Riven, my two paragons of great puzzle game design I brought up before, are this in their essence. Getting to the end goal has a set path, even if the puzzles are so well integrated into the illusion of the game that it feels much more freeform and organic. It felt weird to me that The Witness was that much less subtle about its illusions. Like it wasn't even trying. At the very least, this game is dedicated to the bit. Circle and line puzzles are used for everything here, not just guiding you from place to place around the island. From turning lights on and off, to opening and closing doors, all the way up to steering boats, activating elevators, turning on windmills, and shooting giant mountain lasers, etc. It's kind of impressive how much application this game manages to find within the act of highlighting lines in certain ways on grids. More to it, following the paths of the screens is a great way to get to see this enticing environment, regardless of how much there is to actually do here. It's based purely in the classic philosophical school of take a moment to stop and smell the flowers. And that works for some people, myself included. I have talked previously about how I get a kick out of just existing in a game space for a time and not really even doing anything. It won't get you anywhere, but maybe it's what you need right now. The doing is not the goal of the environments in the same way as many other games out there. What will look like environmental storytelling to most or many players in this game seems, at least to me, to simply appeal to the ethereal, stirring up curiosity, giving the impression of a story, and at times being a sort of visual development journal for the game you are playing. You know, like that art film your friend convinced you to watch. The ordered nature of the puzzles will lead to or past most of what there is to see in this game, and there is a lot of the world that is only accessible through indulging this mechanical obsession. And for a lot of people, that's the key word that will start their descent into this game proper. I remember a lot of people talking about how circles and lines seemed to appear in their everyday life after playing this game. It's something I experienced myself, both times that I had this game in my mind. My big connection with it was when I stepped back from the moment and took a second to draw in just how much structure there was around one singular action in a game this long and complex. I began to fall in love with the interplay of singular simplicity with variable complexity that this game presents. These puzzles live in the kind of relationship there is between using a pen to carefully write a Christmas card versus using a pencil to jot down a shopping list, or driving your car to work and then driving it to a concert by your favorite band. They are the same fundamental action, but differentiated by purpose, objective, and variables within the environment. There are supposedly 650 puzzles for the player to solve in The Witness, and they are all accomplished through this interplay. This is where disappointment starts to fade. Sure, I was hoping for a new experience like the games I've loved in the past, learning about a story and world enough to discover and understand puzzles within it, but The Witness turned me right around and showed me how to enjoy a world hiding behind puzzles. It's mentally engaging while visually stunning. I'm thinking in ways I hadn't considered before. I'm engaging with this weird adventure on my own terms and out of my own drive. There was always enough here to get me wondering what was over the next proverbial horizon. By this point, I had settled into a comfortable gameplay loop, focused on getting to the top of the mountain and figuring out what the lasers did. I wasn't really wondering what else was out there waiting for me anymore. I was okay letting go of my old expectations, because I had a goal in mind. But little did I know that the game had other things planned. Good viewer, please consider this your spoiler warning. If you haven't watched my video on Riven, then just let it be known that the game is a tightly constructed world that harbors a people, a culture, and stories that result in things to be discovered. The puzzles you solve in the game come directly out of the actions of the people in that world, and the clues on that path are based on the knowledge you gather and the understanding of that world that you come by. Figuring out what is necessary to understand your goals is half the challenge. Myst and Riven both have details or materials for you to interact with, entire books you can read, even the puzzles, the objectives of the games work to deepen the world you are in, building that illusion and the mysteries hidden within it. The line between mechanic and aesthetic in these games is so blurry it's almost not there, or at least you'll think you need your prescription adjusted. This is not the case in The Witness. The line between aesthetic and mechanics is solid, very visible, and seemingly impassable. The puzzles are quite literally there, in your face, no illusions about it, and the world is what you have to put work into experiencing. Until suddenly, that changes. So much of The Witness is, like I said, hidden behind its puzzles, but this works in two ways. Indeed, you need to solve the puzzles on the panels to open much of the island to you, but in order to engage with the island on that deeper level, in the same way you'd expect to with it being a successor to the sorts of games I can't shut up about, you need to apply your learning of the deliberate and obvious mechanics to the previously ignored aesthetics, figuring out how to blur that line. It doesn't necessarily happen right there and right then. After all, these brand new environmental puzzles that we just stumbled into are just about everywhere, hidden in the details of buildings, the forms of nature, sometimes traversing both. This one was really cool to find. In my case, I found my first environmental puzzle in the temple, where I was wondering why the doors were opening and closing in the ways they were until I noticed what was going on with them. I remember the shock I felt, a combination of the revelation itself and the just really harrowing sound that plays when tracing an environmental puzzle. It's no secret, though, that the panel and river at the top of the mountain is where this revelation is designed to be discovered, or at least where it's most obvious. Here it is fostered into awareness by a purposeless panel that mirrors the shape of the river down below, but from your perspective, perfectly behind it. Which I think is the first statement the game is making, hinting at its deeper purpose. And this, in my opinion, is where the game really opens up, where it, quote, hits my brain in the way I hope all games do, end quote, as I put it before. The observation of perspective as a concept is at the heart of this entire game, and I think that's where the game wants to send you if you're willing to go. I'm hardly the first person to make that connection. From the very beginning of the game, it's highlighted in just about every way you can imagine, from the subtle to the painfully obvious. The hidden details in the world that lead not to conclusions, but just little moments of realization or recognition. Faces hidden in trees, contrast between objects and shadow, statues a great distance away holding hands in the right perspective, all the way up to an entire person kneeling in prayer, rendered in the reflection of a landscape off of the water. Even just the placement of couches in locations where it seems weird for them to be is a moment where the game could be seen to be inviting you to stop and just take a look at what you can see and enjoy the quiet. It's a pretty bizarre experience to walk into a game with one expectation only to pack it all away and let that settle into a completely different reality. Then for the game to throw the doors open about 6 or 8 or however many hours in and get you speeding back to all those initial expectations. Indeed, most people watching this video will be well familiar with the big revelation the Witness offers that I just put up on display, but I wanted to try and create the feeling of wonder and amazement that I felt when it occurred to me just what else was going on in this game, how those visions of Myst and Riven I held tight to while approaching the threshold of the Witness were validated after all, just not how I expected or in any way that I could have seen coming. Because the Witness is not a game about a world, it's a game about our world. What I took away from The Witness was how well it simulates the development of an interpretive language for its player. In practice, it teaches us about circles and lines until we are able to find them ourselves out in the wild. A framework that allows us to see things in a new light, to find new value in what is around us. By giving us this new perspective, this new mentality complete with an ideological and philosophical vocabulary, the game has shown us something deeper, something that was previously obscured or inobvious to us, which is essentially what I wanted from this game. Not quite in the Riven way, not even in the Myst way, but something different. I wanted to dive into this cluster of systems that make up an environment of play and figure out what it had to offer, to find something deeper within it. My downfall was in assuming that it would be in the form of a narrative revelation that would draw me in emotionally. But the great trick of The Witness is that it spends the entire runtime teaching you all the ways line mazes on this island need to be drawn exclusively on these little panels. These artificial, clearly mechanical, rigid grids on screens that are obviously a construction made by someone. But eventually, hopefully, you will get pulled into this repetition, this mechanical obsession enough to see how to find that something deeper within. Specifically, the environmental puzzles. Free of the screens, far outside the grids that we know and love, just out in the wild. And there are plenty of them. I don't know exactly how many, but I prefer not knowing. The obsidian pillars around the island give you an outline of all of them, and if you examine them enough, you could figure out a number, but that would take away so much, wouldn't it? If you are playing this game, especially for the first time, then you are engaging with these panels. There's no question about it. There's no getting around them. In order to fully engage with the game, you need to develop this interpretive language. Class is in session, the lecture has started, and it's time to learn how to draw line puzzles. Crack your textbooks and start drawing some lines. And if you learn good enough, then you can see how this thinking, this language that you have learned, can be applied to the world around you, free from the textbooks and lectures. It is amazing to me how this game manages to teach us to apply a way of thinking to the wider concepts around us, and I applaud it for doing so, because it is something we all do, every single one of us. The Witness is very clearly a game about learning, which from a purely mechanical interpretation is not that groundbreaking. It is literally played by learning its rules and using that knowledge to complete its tasks. I personally couldn't help but see it as an example of the ways that we develop the outlooks which we take with us into the world. Take a few steps back from that into the big picture, and suddenly it starts to look like learning about people and how we all see the world. It's a game about circles and lines, sure, but we all have circles and lines we've drawn in our lives. Maybe they are a high school diploma, trade school apprenticeship, university degree, a religious upbringing, or theater school training. Maybe they're a talk radio host or a pile of favorite books, advice from a parent or guardian that didn't make sense until you were an adult, A time in your life when you were traveling the world, experiencing other cultures, or maybe it's as simple as the time you took apart an electronic device to see how it worked when you were young. Maybe it's something that makes you happy. Maybe it's something you'd rather forget. What we do, what we learn, informs what we see. This is what I heard the witness saying to me, that it showed me in its own simple, near universal language that we can learn just by moving through it. How telling it is that this language is used to do everything here. Open doors, turn on lights, elevators, all the things I mentioned before, tying it all together, a massive interconnected understanding of what is around us. How following the path of this specifically academic venture leads nowhere meaningful, or the frameworks that guide us start to break down, become hard to keep staring at times hostile to our engagement, an ultimate answer that seems heavenly, what we've been fighting for this whole time, only for it to kick us back out into the world, undoing all of our good work, sending us back into the beginning with the harsh but fair sentiment, "You have all the tools you need, good luck." Indeed, the true ending of the game is found among the environmental puzzles, hidden behind one of my much beloved final puzzles hidden in plain sight thing that I'm not gonna spoil here because unlike Myst, there are fewer safeguards to keep you from just running straight to it on your first go around. The game offers you frameworks from which to approach big scary concepts and tiny little ideas alike that contradict and grind against each other at first, but can be reconciled if you know how to line them up properly. The panel puzzles are like a journey through life. Whatever it is that we learned, however we learned it, and how it then becomes visible in the world around us. And this is reflected in the audio logs, those little tidbits of wisdom or knowledge from philosophers thinking on basic truths, theologians reaching for God, scientists searching for answers, astronauts looking out over everything all at once, all of them asking the player to consider a viewpoint, a potentially new idea or way of seeing a simple truth, or perhaps breaking down a simple interaction of life into components and pieces to better understand the understanding of that thing. The video clips in the theater discussing the basic elements of desire, the self, physics, awareness, passion, and achievement, it all leads back to perspective. What do you take in? What do you value in your outlook? How could you expand that outlook?
Would be to recognize within yourself the ability to understand anything, because that ability's there, as long as it's explained clearly enough.
And maybe all of this doesn't land for you. Maybe it's a nice bit of flavor to the game. Maybe it's passing you by completely. But maybe it's getting you thinking. As per my ramblings just now, what I got out of this game came very much out of my own constructed perspective. Go figure. There are plenty of perfectly valid reads on the game out there, and I hope that's what the game is celebrating. Not everyone is going to want the kind of heady and out there read on the game that I've just put forward. Just looking at this game at a glance, it's easy to see how much there is here that we can internalize and take away with us, which is what I really latched onto in this game. There's a very convincing argument to be made that this game is an exercise in Zen-like contemplation of self and world, rejecting outside influences and focusing on the function of the game as it is. For instance, you should all do yourselves a favor and go check out the excellent Electron Dance video, The Unbearable Now, an interpretation of The Witness, if you haven't already, link in the descripto. It is a great mechanics-focused interpretation of the game that really resonated with me while I was putting this video together. And to draw both of these ideas together, ultimately I really respect and value a game that can build its own kind of Zen simply through the intermingling of mind and play. James Burke may assert that art tells you more about the artist than the world, but he doesn't ponder on the capability of a work of art to tell the observer about themselves. I know I'm starting to sound a bit reader-responsive right now, but, how do you think I got where I wound up with this one? Look it up if you're curious, but I think this is something that games do brilliantly. At the center of it all, to me, no matter how or from where you come at this game, the core of it is what the puzzles mean to you. It's very possible they are just puzzles. Maybe they are a journey, maybe they are a fulfilling challenge, or maybe they are waiting patiently to have meaning applied to them. The Witness is a game that gives whatever you can get out of it, and it's a big, beautiful mess of ideas that could realistically inspire all kinds of revelations in its players. Perspective offers value, even if it isn't material or actionable in the moment. The puzzles are an indisputable task with an answer written in stone that are still ideal for absorbing what the player brings to the experience, reflecting off of the concrete words and ideas that the game also submits for consideration. They are an objective abstraction illustrating subjective understanding. Ultimately, I'm glad that The Witness exists. The more I think on it, the more excited about it I get. I've been staring at this script trying to get it written for nigh on 6 months at this point, and in spite of that, I'm probably more excited to play this game now than maybe I ever have been. It's a game I still haven't found the bottom of, and I'm excited to see what I take away from it in the future. It's one of my favorite types of games, and even though it dwells in the abstract, that it is not a fluid start-to-finish experience, it is a game I love the idea of spending time within, just like my old favorites in this genre. The line that I draw between Myst and Riven and then to The Witness is more of a slow, dramatic zooming out, contextualizing a bigger picture that comes into clearer focus the further away we get. The early works of Cyan Worlds are trying to teach you objective truths about their worlds and fiction. There are characters, there are stories, and the paths that you take to examine these elements are through the puzzles so fluidly integrated into the environments that require you to know the world if you're going to properly engage with them. The Witness takes this same philosophy of gameplay and applies it to the opposite configuration. The world must be approached through blatant and obvious puzzles in order to understand the much more nebulous truths of this abstract and disconnected place, exploring possibly what it means to even have a world. What unites them is the simple idea of existing in a game space, in its here and now, looking, interacting, and learning no matter what that looks like. From stories to worlds, to what it means to be in those worlds, that line keeps going, and I have to wonder where it will take me next, and most of all, where it might end.